In my previous investigations, we've explored the works of the Old World, the impossible geometry of the star forts, the buried foundations of our modern cities, the anachronistic maps that chart a forgotten geography. We have asked what they built, how they built it, and when they might have vanished. But the most profound and vital question has always remained. Lingering silently beneath every piece of architectural evidence, who were the people of this lost civilization? What did they look like? How did they live? To answer this, I turned away from the grand structures and towards the human record. I turned to the archaeology of North America, specifically the reports of the 19th and early 20th centuries. This was a fervent period of discovery, a time when the great, ancient burial mounds of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys were being excavated for the first time by farmers, amateur antiquarians, the burgeoning scientific institutions of the nation. I expected to find the familiar story, the one taught in our history books. I expected records of Native American artifacts, the burial customs of a known people, the slow and steady narrative of human settlement. Instead, I found something else. In the dry, dusty, and now digitized archives of old newspapers, I found a story that has been systematically erased from our collective memory. A story that was once common knowledge, reported as fact in towns and cities across the continent. A story of a different race of men, a race of giants. The anomaly is not a single, questionable artifact. It is a vast and consistent body of written testimony, preserved in the journalistic records of the day. We will call it by a simple name: the newspaper accounts of giant skeletons. Before the age of centralized media, local newspapers were the primary record of daily life and discovery, and from the 1850s to the 1940s, these records tell a story that is, by modern standards, unbelievable. Let us examine the record. The New York Times, May 4, 1885, under the headline "A Giant Skeleton Found," the paper reports on a discovery in a burial mound near Gizzy, Minnesota. The skeleton, when measured, was found to be 9 feet in height. The San Francisco Call, December 17, 1897, reports that miners in Sonora, California, discovered the mummified remains of a woman who was 7 feet and a half in height. The World, New York, October 8, 1908, under the headline "Giant Skeleton Unearthed," it details how workers in San Diego, California, found a skeleton of monstrous size, estimated at over 8 feet tall, along with unusual artifacts. The Arizona Silver Belt, November 11, 1891, reports a race of giants dug up. A burial mound near Crittenden, Arizona, reveals massive stone sarcophagi containing skeletons over 9 feet in length, some of which were reported to have 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And the reports continue, a relentless drumbeat of impossible discoveries. From Ohio, a skeleton 9 feet 8 inches tall, discovered in a mound near Brewersville in 1879. From West Virginia, 7 foot 6 inch skeleton, found in a burial mound in 1883. From Wisconsin, a report from 1897 details the discovery of a massive skull, 3 times the size of a modern human's, unearthed from a mound near Lake Delavan. These are not isolated reports. They are a flood. From the east coast to the west, from the Great Lakes to the Mexican border. Hundreds, if not thousands, of local and national newspapers reported the discovery of a forgotten progeny, the skeletal remains of a race of giants that once, it seems, inhabited the entire American continent. The reports are too numerous, too consistent, and too geographically widespread to be dismissed as simple hoaxes. They are a historical record of a phenomenon that has been deliberately forgotten. When a modern historian or archaeologist is confronted with this mountain of journalistic evidence, the official explanation is almost always the same. These reports, they will tell you, are simply a product of their time. They are dismissed as sensationalist hoaxes, a form of yellow journalism, common in the 19th century, designed to sell papers in small towns with tall tales. Alternatively, they are explained away as the misinterpretations of amateur farmers and workers who, upon discovering the large bones of a mastodon or a giant sloth, mistook them for human remains. The reports are treated as curiosities, as folklore, as tall tales from a less scientific and more credulous era. In short, they are not considered data. This explanation is convenient. It is tidy. It protects the established timeline of human history in North America. It requires no difficult questions to be asked. But this comfortable dismissal ignores a crucial, repeating detail within the reports themselves. A detail that appears with methodical consistency. From a newspaper in rural Minnesota to one in bustling New York City. A detail that points not to a scattered collection of local hoaxes, but to a centralized institutional involvement. Time and time and time again. After describing the discovery and the size of the bones and the strange artifacts found alongside them, the articles end with the same fateful sentence: the remains were carefully packed and sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study. After which, in almost every single case, they were never seen or heard from again. This recurring detail, the Smithsonian connection, changes everything. The investigation pivots. The question is no longer, did giants exist? The question becomes, what happened to the evidence? The trail of hundreds of independent discoveries, reported as fact by newspapers across the country, all leads to the doorstep of a single, powerful, and federally funded organization, the Smithsonian Institution. The central accusation, supported by decades of research from independent investigators and even some alleged internal whistleblowers, is as simple as it is profound. The theory is that the Smithsonian Institution, during its formative years in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, engaged in a systematic and deliberate campaign to collect, catalog, and then conceal this paradigm-shattering evidence. Skeletons that did not fit the desired historical narrative were gathered, and then they vanished from the official record of history. But to make such a serious accusation, one must establish a motive. Why would a scientific institution, dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge, actively suppress the most significant anthropological discovery in human history? The motive, according to the theory, was the protection of a new and fragile scientific paradigm, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, as laid out in his 1859 work on the origin of species. In the late 19th century, the scientific establishment, with the Smithsonian at its forefront, was locked in a fierce ideological battle to establish Darwinism as the definitive story of human origins. The narrative was that man had evolved linearly, from smaller, simpler, ape-like ancestors, slowly progressing towards the pinnacle of creation, modern man, the discovery of a race of advanced, intelligent giants, often found with sophisticated metal artifacts and buried in complex, engineered mounds, was a direct and fatal threat to this entire worldview. Giants did not fit the story. A previous, more powerful race of men contradicted the clean, linear progression that Darwin's theory demanded. They were an inconvenient truth. And so, according to the accusation, a decision was made. For the new story of evolution to live, the old story of the giants had to die. The evidence had to disappear. But was this institutional cover-up merely about protecting a favored scientific theory? Or was it part of a much larger, global project to reset the timeline of history itself? This is where the specific actions of the Smithsonian Institution align perfectly with the broader Tartarian framework. This framework proposes that the giants of North America were not a separate, regional anomaly. They were the people of the Old World. They were the descendants, or perhaps even the direct survivors, of the same global civilization that built the star forts that charted Antarctica before the ice, and whose magnificent cities now lie buried beneath our own. If a global, Old World civilization was indeed destroyed by a cataclysm, the Great Mud Flood, then its surviving populations would have been scattered and diminished. The giants described in these 19th century reports may represent the last pockets of this forgotten progeny, clinging to existence in the ruins of their former world. In this context, the mission of the newly formed powers of the 19th century, the inheritors of the world, would be to establish their own historical legitimacy. To do this, they would need to erase all physical and cultural memory of the civilization that came before. Hiding the very bones of the previous inhabitants would be the most direct and effective way to ensure this great forgetting was permanent. It wasn't just about protecting Darwin's theory of evolution, it was about protecting the new world's claim to the timeline of history. The Smithsonian, in this view, was not acting alone. It was acting as the American arm of a worldwide effort to curate the past, and to bury any evidence that contradicted the new, official narrative. Let us now move from the framework of the theory to the hard evidence that supports this accusation of a systematic concealment. First, and most powerfully, the sheer volume of journalistic reports. If this were a story about one or two articles from a single, unreliable newspaper, it could be easily dismissed. But it is not. It is a consistent journalistic record, composed of hundreds of articles from hundreds of different newspapers, from the respected New York Times to the smallest local papers in rural Wisconsin, spanning nearly a century. We are asked to believe that all of these independent reporters, editors, farmers, and local officials across an entire continent were either all lying in concert, or were all simultaneously fooled by animal bones. To dismiss this vast body of evidence as a series of unrelated hoaxes is, from a statistical standpoint, far less plausible than the original reports themselves. Second, the corroborating physical details. These newspaper reports are not just about height. They consistently mention other strange, anomalous features that do not align with any known human population. We read of skeletons with double rows of teeth, a feature reported in mounds from Ohio to Pennsylvania. We see reports of skulls with small, horned protrusions, and we see persistent mentions of elongated skulls and jawbones so large they could fit over the face of a modern man. The consistency of these specific, bizarre details across geographically separate discoveries suggests the reporters were describing a real, distinct, and unknown physical type. Third, the associated artifacts. The giants were not discovered in empty graves. The reports frequently describe the discovery of sophisticated artifacts alongside the remains, copper armor of remarkable quality, highly advanced metal alloys, intricate pipes, and even evidence of woven fabrics. These artifacts often tell a story of a culture far more advanced than the simple hunter-gatherer narrative we are given for ancient North America. The existence of this high culture, associated with the giants, may have been another reason the evidence had to be suppressed. Fourth, and finally, the legal and institutional obstruction. In modern times, numerous researchers, authors, And even lawyers have used the Freedom of Information Act to formally request access to the Smithsonian's acquisition records from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They are not asking for the bones themselves. They are simply asking for the paperwork, the accession logs for unclassified human remains, sent from the specific regions mentioned in the newspaper articles. The institution's consistent and categorical refusal to release these specific, century-old documents is, for many investigators, a modern admission of guilt. Why hide records that are over a century old, unless they contain information that contradicts the official story? The refusal to be transparent is, in itself, a powerful piece of evidence. Today, if you were to ask the Smithsonian Institution about the giant skeletons, you would receive a clear and unequivocal denial. Their official, public position is that they have no record of any such giant skeletons ever being received, catalogued, or held in their collections. All the newspaper reports, they claim, are fabrications, hoaxes, and misidentifications from a bygone era. Their position is simple: nothing was ever received, and therefore, nothing was ever hidden. But this categorical denial creates a logical paradox that is, in many ways, more difficult to believe than the existence of the giants themselves. We are asked to believe in a century-long, nationwide conspiracy of journalistic fraud. We are asked to believe that hundreds of different newspaper reporters, editors, local officials, doctors, and amateur archaeologists, all separated by time and distance, independently decided to invent stories about giant skeletons. And then, as part of their hoax, all independently decided to name the exact same institution, the Smithsonian, as the recipient of their fictional finds. This explanation stretches credulity to its breaking point. It requires more faith in a vast, uncoordinated conspiracy of liars than it does in the words printed in the historical record. Furthermore, the modern cover-up continues, not through the active destruction of bones, but through a calculated campaign of institutional silence and academic ridicule. Mainstream archaeology refuses to engage with this topic in any serious way. There are no significant, funded projects to forensically investigate these old newspaper claims, to cross-reference the names of the discoverers with local historical records, or to perform geological surveys of the original mound sites. The entire subject is considered career suicide for any serious academic. It is labeled a fringe topic, a conspiracy theory, and any scholar who dares to investigate it is immediately branded as a purveyor of pseudoscience. The cover-up continues, not by hiding the bones, but by burying the very question itself, under layers of academic dogma and institutional scorn. In the end, we are left with two competing stories, two competing conspiracies. The official story asks us to believe in a century-long, nationwide conspiracy of journalistic fraud, a collective, uncoordinated delusion that infected hundreds of communities and newspapers for no apparent reason. The evidence, however, preserved in the ink of those very newspapers, points to a much simpler, more logical, and far more chilling conspiracy: a centralized, institutional effort to conceal a discovery that would have rewritten the book on human history. The newspaper archives of America may, in fact, be the largest single body of evidence for a lost race of man that has ever existed. They are a fossil record, not of bone, but of a truth that was deemed too inconvenient, too disruptive, to survive into the modern age. They are the ghosts of a forgotten progeny. This forces us to ask a chilling and vital question. What else has been collected for study, and then conveniently lost in the dusty basements of our most trusted institutions? What other discoveries that contradict the official narrative have been quietly removed from the historical record? And who has given a single institution the authority to decide which branches of the human family tree are remembered, and which are pruned from history forever.